Hello and welcome. This is Visions and Manifestos. Recently, Jordan Peterson has been presenting his ideas for what he would consider to be a conservative manifesto, and there's been a lot of conversation about that. And I thought it would be a really good idea to start a broader discussion, get more voices involved about what kinds of principles and policies and just underlying psychological mindsets that we want to take into the future that would actually build a situation in a world that most of us would find much more livable than our current state of affairs. So it's my hope that the viewers will put their own 2 cents into the comment section so we can have a little bit of back and forth on this topic. Don't forget that you'll be able to find me and my guest, Puritan Vue, on the Gilded server. So if you're wanting to get a more involved discussion, you can always come and see us there. So, Amanda, we are going to try to propose some solutions today to the world's problems. Let's do this. I think you had some principles you wanted to line out for us. So let's start there.
Sure. Now, noting Jordan Peterson's manifesto, he did make some points and he touched on some topics, and I'll just highlight a few of them. One of them was the humility, liberty, autonomy, truth, things like that. So as you go down the list, and I won't exhaustive, we don't want to rehash his work, but
Right.
just making note of that. He put forth these 12 or 13 values that conservatives need to embrace, so to speak. And then I argue that without a proper psychological foundation, that we really can't embody these types of platforms or policies in a consistent or cogent manner. So I propose that any person wishing to call themselves a conservative would consider these attributes and incorporate them into their own psychology. I think it's just for a better fabric of society all around. And so I'll
Mhm.
just touch on each of these. There's 9, and then I have a statement, and then we can go into what that might mean
Sounds
practically.
good. Sounds
So
good.
love is the first one, and love as a motivation. Then
Hmm.
peace as an achievement, patience as an attitude, joy as a reward, kindness as a discipline, goodness as an impression, gentleness as an action, faithfulness as a promise, and then you have self-control, which I think is the linchpin to all of this, and that is the governance. So self-control being a governance in which we employ all of the other attributes, and then therefore the policies flow. So that those
Okay.
are my 9 pieces of psychological advice. If we cultivate those characteristics within the conservative movement above all, then we're going to, by necessity, grow and profit and flourish, which is the ultimate goal, I would think, of conservatives. We think about the word conserve. What are we saving?
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
I think that, if you love something, something creates joy, something you're gentle with things. That means you're caring for them. That, again, those kinds of psychological outset or mindset would generate the correct policies going forward to get solutions, which is also a conservative thing. We don't want to just war to war. We want to
Yeah.
create a resolution that we can all abide by.
Yeah, and I think that is something we are definitely missing. I mean, everyone is offering up ideas and their visions for the future. No one is really proposing things that everyone could more or less live with. And if if we're going to be realists, which I think we really do need to be realistic about our expectations, you have to have some kind of bargain in society that the majority can kind of like what, this is okay. It's not perfect. We can work on some things, but we've got the broad strokes. And I'd like to spend a little bit of time on some of the attributes you mentioned. I mean, the first one you talked about
Mhm.
was love. One thing that I think the Greeks really have over on us is that they have so many different words for love in their language. Whereas in English, love is a little bit ambiguous. It depends a great deal on the context because, of course, we have love within marriage, love, towards your children, towards your parents and your siblings, love even for a broader community. But I think that in order to have love, we're going to have to tackle the idea that love is actually going to be a worthwhile thing because though I'm looking around me and I'm seeing people are being taught not to invest in that way. Does that coincide or contradict with what you're observing?
No, yeah, that perfectly aligns. And the way Jordan Peterson actually phrased it, I think more often than not, or he does, is goodwill. So those two
Hmm.
things, as far as societally goes, that's what we're really aiming toward. We want goodwill. We're giving people the benefit of the doubt that again, they're going to take on these other attributes, and therefore that will be, an they all kind of coincide with each other. So if you're gentle with something, that's an expression of loving it. It's the opposite of carelessness and things like that. So
Yeah.
the general goodwill for society, we want to do what is best for the most people for the most good. And that that motivation of what type of love it is just a generalized love for humans as a fellow species. So it doesn't have to be, where it's not a sacrificial love necessarily, but it's a compromising love. It's a diplomatic love, a diplomatic, that's the
Hmm.
word I'm looking for, love. So that when you come to the table for negotiations, being motivated by the love of country, of people, of the good things in life. Everybody wants clean water and clean air and things like that, but if we love the people that we're supporting in the policies, then they're going to make better decisions. So it's
Yeah. I definitely see what you're meaning with that. I mean, and I
definitely
like that you
missing
phrased it
the
as essentially as goodwill. I really like the way you phrase that because we do have to have goodwill. And of course, in order for people to cultivate that goodwill, they've got to abandon this idea of like, oh, humans are parasites on this side of the earth, or humans are only going to hurt other humans. I mean, there's a lot of things we have to reject to get to that place. But I do like that that was kind of the first on your list. What was the next mindset you had on your list?
The second one was peace, and peace is kind
Peace.
of an end result, and peace within ourselves, peace within our environments, peace with each other. That's a big component that's missing within conservative circles today. Is there's a lot of backbiting between who's a real conservative, who's a fake conservative, and they're a rhino, and it goes back and forth. But the idea is that in order to achieve peace, and that's why I call it as an achievement, it should
Hmm.
be the end goal. The best that we can hope for society and globally is that we can just live peaceably with each other during our time, leaving a legacy for our children and grandchildren to then build
Hmm.
upon that peace, not the war, not repairing the damage that we've done, which was, I think, what we're experiencing in our generation now. Is there have been many mistakes that have gone or swept under the
Hmm.
rug, and now we're having to pick up the pieces and refigure it. And I would like to see 21st century conservatives really try to achieve a peace within ourselves as a group, and then that will outcrop to the world and within our policies, making peaceful solutions, not just better than the Democrats. That's not a,
Yes.
it's
Yeah,
the tit
that's not a
tat.
platform.
Yeah, at least I'm not a Democrat. That's not good enough anymore. We need to actually
Yeah.
have real solutions come forward, and those solutions should be peaceful to lead us toward a more relaxed state of being.
Right. To have some de-escalation in our society and frankly around the world. And of course, in order to have that peace within yourself, because I agree with you totally that it does have to come from within and it's something that emanates outwards. But in order to do that, I think people really have to square with their own consciences. They've really got to take ownership of all their deeds, good and bad, and just be honest about where they've made mistakes, how they can do better forward. I do perceive, and this may be fair or unfair on my part, but my perception is that people spend so much time running away from their mistakes, wounds that they've inflicted, things that they really knew better than to do, that they never have that moment of accountability with themselves. And I think they fear that even more so than being called to account by another person, because that's what, oh, well, so and so's just picking on me. Maybe so and so is standing in the place of where your conscience should have been. And maybe this process should have started long ago. And I think you have to go through that to have some sense of peace and resolution within yourself. And I think if we start looking to back to the old proverbs, as you know, I've been doing a series on the Havamal. I've done a lot of work with the Celtic triads, and a lot of these sayings and verses and proverbs have to do with peaceable relations, about living life in a reasonable way, which makes you much more likely to be at peace with yourself, and to not use the sword as the first resort. And I think that would that would be a great step forward. I mean, it has
Yeah.
really amazed me in the past few months just how quickly if people have been like, "Oh, well, we just need to go to the highest level of conflict possible." I'm just, could we try the lower levels of conflict resolution first? I mean, did we
Right.
give that a whirl at all?
Exactly. I find that society globally, but especially in the West, we're in this perpetual cycle of healing, and we never actually heal. We just like
Hmm.
to, promulgate the idea of healing as a method to cope, but trying to come to peace is a much better, um, I think,
Yeah.
psychological approach to it. It's not so much about looking externally for healing, but again, look at the human body. When you heal,
Right.
it goes through stages, and then it's as if it did not happen. There may be a scar, but you don't have the open, gaping, bleeding wound constantly, perpetually, again,
Hmm.
solutions driven, which is, I think,
Yeah.
that, what would Jordan Peterson was getting at in some of the things is that, in order to have peace, we have to have certain guidelines. But how do you get to those guidelines without the right mindset, the psychology behind it, getting people back
Oh,
into a cohesive, not a hive mind, but at least a cohesive understanding of these attributes are good and should
yeah.
be embraced.
Well, I mean, there are some things that if we weren't all constantly riled up, we would agree that there are a lot of general things that most human beings, regardless of race, religion, and creed, would agree were generally good. And I like that you are likening peace essentially to a cure. Because, like you, I mean, all this talk about healing this and healing that, I'm thinking you're using whatever methodology for healing, but you're just using that as a painkiller. You're using it as a coping mechanism. You're not making progress. So I'm glad you brought that up. What was next on the list?
Then we have patience, and patience is an attitude. So, patience is just an easy word for non-instant gratification. So, the
Hmm.
old axiom that all good things come to those who wait.
Hmm.
Patience is slow to speak and quick to listen. There's all kinds of things that would come to mind psychologically again when you think about patience. And so patience is, letting your children be children, not needing them to be miniature adults, having patience with those who are less informed or less interested than you are. So many of our fights in the conservative circles are about who is more enlightened and who has more knowledge of the other side and their devious ways. And, so if we have patience with each other and we have patience with the world at large, I think that we're then better off to cope again with the issues that come up and then coming up with a better solution or resolution than we do just with the reactionary, well, they propose to use the money this way. I want to use it this way. That's not, that doesn't
And
make
I'm
you
over
better.
here saying, do we have to use the money at all? Could we pay
Right.
bills first?
I keep screaming, stop spending my money. You didn't ask me. But yeah, so patience as an attitude is just one of those things that if you put that in the forefront of your mind when you're seeking to respond in any situation, that counting to 10 before you say something you'll regret, that goes a long way. Even if in the end you do have to vent your grievances, you have to air those things out and approach your government or your municipality or your neighbors or your family, whatever it is. It's better to kind of sit back a minute, analyze that, have patience that the answer will come, and not make such rash decisions. And that's what I see in politics today is we're so reactionary. They did this, now we must do that. And it's not thought out. And then we all end up in a mess.
Well, and they don't even have the patience to think through to the next election cycle because it is, as you say, just what happened in the last 5 minutes. And I would think, really, as conservatives, we need to think about in terms of generations, about what can
Mm.
be achieved over the long term and having the patience to realize that we may not get as far into the solutions as we would prefer in our lifetimes, and to realize, okay, my work is to get it so far, and then the next generation can take over and can get a little bit further. And I think that takes a great deal of patience and a lot of restraint. So
Yes.
next virtue on the list, what comes
It
next?
was joy, and joy is a reward, and joy is one of those emotions that we feel when we've done a good job, we've reached the goal. It is the reward. It is the reward of goodwill. It is the reward of patience. It is the reward of peace. So having true joy is a as a reward kind of, or as a goal, should be a psychological mindset. So again, it's not about like just finding your joy and doing whatever makes you happy. It's seeking to bring joy to the world, seeking to bring joy to to the governed. So like, anything that we can do policy wise that would ease the burden of the human condition, that would then facilitate joy within the people. A joyful people are more apt to work harder, live longer, be healthier, be happier, less violent. All the wonderful things that we want to achieve in society starts within when they are joyful, to be alive, to be a part of the society, to feel a sense of belonging. So that's the kind of reward that I would like to see in the conservative movement. If you're conservative, you then therefore can receive the joy of your efforts.
Well, I have that sense of accomplishment. And I think we do need to take moments whenever we have victories to enjoy it. It doesn't mean that we're ignoring what has yet to be accomplished. It doesn't mean that we've put all the other problems on the sideline. But, can you take a minute and be glad, wow, took a step in the right direction today? I think that is something that is worth, celebration every now and then. Let's
Mhm.
see, what's next on the list?
So the next was kindness. And these aren't in any particular order, just the way I wrote them down. So kindness as a discipline. So kindness is more or less a choice. And so, you've heard the phrase, I woke up and chose violence. We can wake up. Yeah, we can wake up and choose kindness. So those, it always makes you feel good. You watch the videos, the random acts of kindness, the pay it forward, experimental, societal type of interaction, and it always makes you feel good. The news after a particularly bad news day will end their broadcast with some feel good story, someone who is kind, someone who did something generous, and so that, from kindness, you get things like charity, generosity, volunteerism, It's all motivated out of the kindness of our hearts, which is a conservative value. Everything is on a voluntary basis. There's no authoritarian telling you, be nice, you know.
Or
So,
else.
or else. Yeah. So if we can look at kindness as something to be disciplined within ourselves, if we're presented with a choice to either be mean or be kind, be kind. Be kind to your friends, be kind to your neighbors, be kind to your enemies, even your enemies. I know that's hard, but that is
Well,
how.
that's more of a Christian virtue than a pagan one. I'm afraid I'll have to split it
um,
off from you there. But I do
but
like what you're
even,
saying about
even from
kindness as proactive, as something of saying,
yeah,
okay, everyone else is acting really, really badly. I don't have to do that. Of setting yourself apart from the crowd and saying, I'm not going to be the person who brings one more terrible thing into the world today. I'm going to do something that is worthwhile and good. I can definitely get behind that.
yeah.
Let's see. After kindness, what's next on your list?
Kindness, and then goodness, and goodness as an impression. So goodness, or the word good, is very subjective. What is good versus bad? It depends on your paradigm. But generally a goodness would be something that, again, is something that you would get, or you would feel, or you would understand. So it's an impression of what is good at the time. So even decisions that may or may not be considered good historically were good for the time that it was. And we can go back through and we can see, through like the Revolutionary War, was that good or bad? Ultimately, it was good because it's created what we have now. But were there, did they do it for goodness? I think that was the motivation. Is that they were feeling very oppressed. They were feeling very disjointed from the monarchy. So, in that respect, they did what they thought was good. And that's why I call it an impression, because it is subjective. But there are definitely objective things that we can agree on as conservatives that are good. Cutting down all the trees on the planet is definitely not good. We
Yeah.
so we can The goodness would be to conserve the trees. To an extreme, no. To the level the leftists want to take it, no. But obviously there's a conservativeship would necessarily create a need for goodness as at its base.
I agree. I mean, we can't always control the outcome of our intentions. Sometimes just because, no, I mean, none of us have a bird's eye view of everything. So sometimes we might think, okay, for this circumstances, this makes sense. And then you realize, oh, I was unaware of that detail. And if I had known that, I might have done something different. So, I mean, I think it is good if we at least start with our hearts being in the right place for sure. Okay, next on the list.
And then gentleness, and so gentleness as an action. So when we think of gentleness, I think of small children. You need to instruct them on how to act gently. Their instinct is to hit, to grab, to pull, they have no real understanding of the power that they have physically over the objects in their life. And so if we foremost consider life to be precious, to be worth conserving, especially flourishing and things like that, then we would handle it with care. And so the gentleness that I'm speaking of is just more of a handle with care type of psychology, of an attitude, a mindset, that you wouldn't be reckless, is the opposite of that. So it's less of a disposable society, more of a modular, bringing it together, something that we can use, that we care for, that we treasure, that it's a legacy, heirlooms, things like that.
Yeah.
And so then that goes forward to like our national monuments or observances or things like that, that we, as particularly Americans, hold dear, the conservatives hold dear, that other groups may or may not find particularly unifying, like the flag or the pledge or the anthem, those types of things that we handle with care, and if someone has a redress, then we can, again, apply the other psychology to it to address it in a civil way and not just burn the flag and throw out the Constitution because someone said it was bad.
Yeah, without anyone examining whether or not that claim had any substance to it. All right, that's
Right.
what kills me is that people are so ready to be destructive when all they have is hearsay or someone else's word for it. They have not actually found it out for themselves. And I think that is part of the gentleness that you refer to, of actually knowing what a thing is and why you might want to treat it kindly. And I think this is really akin to the concept of tradition and valuing tradition. And that's
Mm,
something I think we really struggle with as Americans, because somewhere along the line, so I think we've got it into our heads. Well, because the founding fathers threw off the monarchy, they therefore threw off tradition of all kinds. No, no. The reason why they rebelled is because, they didn't think it was right for them as Englishmen, as Britishmen, to be treated by the king in this dreadful way. And he'd been far too influenced by the French and their idea of absolute monarchy. And so they had to rebel because, you know, because of their culture, because of their tradition. And in a way, they were trying to conserve what they really were. And I think we should remember our legacy. I mean, we've had a lot of other cultural influences added into American society, and we also, in our history, we have started to have some homegrown culture as well. But one of those big roots is very British, very very English, and a lot of the philosophical ideas for our republic that do make it, a decent thing and something worth protecting. It did come from that, so maybe a little less with the hate towards those who have contributed to make us who we are. That would probably be helpful.
right. Yeah, definitely a gentle spirit or a gentle mindset would go further, when you approach someone who is wrong. And if you come to them with the wrong attitude, a harshness, a rashness, then they're going to reject you outright. But if you come gently and you ease them into a better thinking, it's gonna go better, even if they ultimately disagree with you in the end. You're not tearing down your friendship or relationship in the meantime. It's
Yeah,
not an agree with me or else again kind of
yeah,
mindset. It's very opposite of what the left thinks and how they
yeah.
operate themselves. They are not gentle. They are very
No.
forthright and abrasive, which is a bad tactic, bad mindset.
Yeah, I can get behind you on that one. Let's see what comes after gentleness.
Faithfulness. And so, Jordan Peterson again talked a lot about truth and foundationally and things like that. So faithfulness is a promise. If you're faithful to do something and people can rely on you to say what you mean what you say, go forward with the good ideas, put down the bad ideas, being faithful to your principles, um, you know, walking the walk, so to speak, and not just talking the talk. Those are the kinds of values that we treasure as conservatives because, again, what are we conserving is things like truth, and then from faithfulness then you get the follow through of the promises and policies made. If the policy promises to benefit people, we want to have faithfulness in those policies that they will achieve that goal and that it won't actually destroy humankind.
Yeah,
So much so as what we see today in the administration currently, where they come out with something that sounds good, but is not good for a vast majority of people. And the people are so ignorant that they don't even know it, or they don't have any faith in it at all. I mean, immediately the established Republicans will immediately attack any policy coming from the left side of the aisle, whether it be good or bad, just because of where it comes from. So if again, when we speak to these conservative values, I would want these to branch out to everyone. I would love to see the left operate under the same way. Have little hope that they will, because they're a bit They're a bit myopic at the moment. But if we can put these principles in effect for display and show how that it goes forward, faithfulness, this is what we said we're going to do, we did it and it worked, then they may turn a corner and come around. But if we just pitch again that rash response that really isn't a better solution, and it fails just as miserably as their idea, then they're not going to have any faithfulness in our platforms at all. They're going to be like, well, you're just as bad as we are, you just did it differently.
Yeah,
So
because I think when people go that route, all they hear is the screeching. I mean, and people keeping their word, whether we're talking in politics or just individual human relationships, that is, I think, one of the most important things. Whether you like what someone is doing or whether you don't like, if you know they will hold to their word, you at least know where you are with them. You can negotiate with that because you're on some solid ground. So I do think that we need to resurrect that spirit. And I think that also means making the choice to primarily have our dealings with people who also keep their word and
mhm.
and saying, look, I'd love to have a conversation with the rest of you, but you're crazy, and you'll say one thing and then you'll do something 5 minutes later. So I would rather invest my time profitably. And I think if people start saying, oh, well, no one's going to put up with me, not being reliable, then I think that would also help turn a corner because they wouldn't be getting any benefits from being on flaky. There's the word.
Right.
That's the word I was looking
Yes,
for.
yes.
Flakiness is no longer rewarded.
We must stop re-electing politicians that continually lie to us. That's a primary
Yes.
example of how we can be faithful in our principles if we start voting for our principles. And when they breach those, it doesn't matter what they say on the campaign trail. The minute they write a bill or pass a law or even vote for something like red flag laws,
Oh,
something that
yeah.
goes against our principles, it should cause us to go, hold on a minute. What do you believe and why? And why aren't you being faithful to what you said? So
Yeah.
many times there's no
Accountability.
accountability there.
Oh, don't worry. When we get to the policy section of this story, I've mixed quite a bottle for them. Let's see. After faithfulness, what came next on your list?
Self-control, which is, again, I call that the linchpin. And so self-control is the governance by which all of these other attributes can be exhibited, abided by, strived for, all of these things. So without self-control, we don't have a republic. We need an authoritarian, because if we cannot rely on ourselves to govern ourselves accordingly, then we're children at that point,
Yeah.
and we have to be governed. So if we can really embrace the idea of self-control, not repaying offense with offense, that's the first thing. This whole fighting and who's a better Republican and things like that, and who's fallen away. We need to try to bring those people back into the fold, and point blank ask them, where did you go astray? When did you start thinking differently? What caused that? And started a conversation instead of just, you're out. We don't like you
Mhm.
anymore. You said the wrong thing. That's what the left does.
Yeah.
We don't want to do that. I think that if we can have some self-control over our individual actions and then our collective actions, our policy actions, that we would, further the flourishing of everyone involved. Because again, governance is about all the people, even the ones who disagree with us, even the ones who are flat out enemies of what we stand for. If we can bring them into some kind of self-control mindset, then at least we may not have the violence that we experience now, the escalation of, we're at nuclear war now because nobody has any
Yeah.
self-control.
No self-control and no forethought in their heads.
Right.
Okay, so I think those are some pretty solid broad things that I think most people could agree with. So let's get into a few policies, and I kind of laid them out as principles, and I had a few details, and we'll just go into it. The first one on my list was the right tool for the right freaking job. This is so important because with, as Marxism took more and more hold in the Western world with, the collectivism and communism and socialism and all of these various things, all of these ideologies lead to one destination, and that's government being this one-stop shop for authority and decisions and the setting of standards. And not only is that tyrannical, but it's also unimaginably ineffective, as we have freaking daily proof. People are begging the government to meddle in things that are far beyond their competency. I mean, if you look historically at governments, the only things they seem to do halfway decently is many governments have been good at defending their borders. They have been good at have policing and having reasonable court systems. And some governments have managed to build a few decent roads and some infrastructure. And beyond that, very little good at all. The government is not your doctor. It is not Great Aunt Matilda who's, correcting you about your etiquette. It cannot tell you about the purpose of meaning of life. It cannot fulfill your spiritual needs. It can't tell you who to marry. It can't tell you how to raise your children. It can't tell you, how to find satisfaction in your life. It's not good at these things. So we've got to really reject the idea that it should have any involvement in areas beyond its competency. And this, for me, this goes beyond, a constitutional issue. This is just, they really suck at it. So let's
Mhm.
stop pretending that they're going to do anything other than suck at these areas of life.
Right. Yeah, I akin it to too many cooks in the kitchen. If you have too many people trying to devise a solution, I mean, again, have you ever tried to go out to dinner with more than just a few people and eat family
Oh,
style? It's
no.
impossible. You cannot you cannot all agree on what kinds of toppings to put on a pizza. How can you expect, the Congress, the Senate, the administration to appease 330 plus million people? It's not
Even
going to happen.
if it was their place to do so. I mean, and
Right.
that's the thing. I mean, they couldn't do this even if it was proper for them to do. So,
Right. It is
and
a fool's
and
errand.
I think it would really help if we start cultivating within ourselves that our first instinct when we're facing a problem is, what can I personally do about it? And
Hmm.
then, once we reach the limit of what we're able to do, then we start involving, other people. But the government should really be turning into the last resort. I mean, we shouldn't be looking for to fight our own personal battles. We definitely shouldn't be using it as nanny to settle our, our kindergarten disagreements. And I think it's going to require, in order to get both ourselves in order and the government in order, is to enforce boundaries that do already constitutionally exist, and also put in some amendments and add a few more. We need to bring government, corporations, all of these huge institutions that are wielding such an ungodly amount of power over us. We need to bring them to heel. Remind that they exist to provide a service. They are not rulers. They're not qualified to be rulers. And I do think that is one of those things that'll be the work of a couple generations, but I think that is something we need to shoot for.
Right. Yes, absolutely. I agree. Yeah, I
Let's
would like
see.
I would like to see a very
Oh,
dwindled government reach. I would like to see widespread deregulation on most social issues. You know, put the governing powers back into making laws that are beneficial to the country at large instead of trying to steer us in the right direction. The idea of
yeah.
passing laws outlawing products or keeping us safe, with the FDA and OSHA and
Oh,
all of
I
these
know.
bureaucracies. I think that that is a complete waste of time at this point. They had
And waste of
their
money.
yeah, they served their purpose in history. Um, and I don't see a need for them. We lived without them for centuries and somehow got by. You know, and we had a whole Enlightenment era pre bureaucracy. You know, so we think back to the Renaissance era where it was kind of a free for all as far as ideas and things like that. I think that we're due for another renaissance in that respect. That, you know, if the government, if the FDA says you can't do this because we said so, then we need to respond. By what authority do you know, and really push them on that. I know that the UN, whoever she was, talked about how she owned, you know, the UN owned the science.
Oh, yes, it
That,
was that lunatic prime minister from New Zealand. Oh, she is a monster.
yeah.
Whoa.
So if she owns the science, my response is, by what authority? Who
Yeah.
deemed you God and, you know, goddess of the UN? And how dare you speak to the world that way? Who are you?
She strikes me as the sort of person that grandma didn't whack her with the wooden spoon often enough. But
Mm,
I think you'll enjoy my next principle, which is in its short version is put a leash on government. And I had a list of things, not as many as what I could have included, but I hit some high points, and I just want to go through them real quick, then we can talk. But first, make sure that it is law enforcement's primary duty to police the politicians, and that
mm,
failure to do so will result in worse consequences for them than if they had followed orders and done what they were told by the politicians. Term limits: no more than 12 years in any one office. There needs to be a gap of 5 years at least between holding any office. They are not allowed to take jobs in media, not allowed to do any lobbying. They need to go out to the real world and get a goddamn job.
there you
Next,
go.
the first order of business in every congressional session is to go through the laws and make sure that any that are not constitutionally compliant are repealed. And before any new legislation is proposed, that there is a thorough examination of existing law made to make sure that we are not having redundancies. We need to have a simplification of all laws. If the common citizen can't understand them and can't remember them all, then we have entirely too many. And we should be able to have a general awareness of what the laws in our country are without having to get a degree or pass the bar. Then we need to prioritize citizens over foreign nationals. And as far as immigration goes, I think we just need to put a stop on that for the next 20 years, get things sorted out, deport everyone who came over illegally, just stop playing around. I mean, the longer that goes on, the more human suffering there is. We
Mm,
also need to prioritize citizens over corporations. Corporations must be held to account to be loyal to the nation and to the citizens, or else they will not be allowed to operate on U.S. soil and will be forbidden to partake in trade in our economy. The right of self defense must be made absolute, and that any attempt to limit or disarm citizens is to be considered an act of treason and war against the citizens themselves. Freedom of religion has to be preserved. The only restriction is that no one can impose their faith on someone else through force. There can be no violence against unbelievers, not even relatives, because you get mad that someone left the faith. And the government may never be used to impose religious edicts. And my last gripe on this particular list is abolish all political parties. They have been an absolute parasite on the system, and I think each candidate needs to own their own support, and they should pass a test on the Constitution before they're permitted to run. So, I gave you a bit of a list there. What's your reaction to all that?
Here, here. I second
I
that
told you
motion.
I was mixing them a bottle.
Yeah, I'm telling you, you've hit the nose right on the head. You know, it is one of those things where if you step back and you look at the mess that we've created with the subsections and the laws upon laws and the laws to amend the laws that we wrote, and it is
Yeah.
an absolute nightmare. And you're right, it all needs to be examined, appealed if necessary. You know, we need to simplify the terms. Yes, and we need to put the limits on what they can and cannot do. And I especially love
Yeah.
the idea of them not being able to profit off of their civic duty.
Hmm.
That is the most cringiest thing. Just I would not buy a book from a juror on a very high profile murder case to find out all the juicy, catty details that
Yeah.
went on in the deliberation room. I don't want to buy a politician's book about how they got, they did whatever they did, whether they
Yeah.
enhanced the swamp, drained the swamp, exposed so and so, found out all the nitty gritty details, and they're going to let you in behind the scenes. If you were so privy to behind the scenes dirt, why didn't you do anything in your power to rectify that while you were in office? I don't want to read your memoir about how bad it is or how good it could be. That those books do not interest me. I can swear, I can attest, I have 0 politicians' books on my shelves. I'm much more interested in philosophy. So it's again, yeah, working in media, doing the news junket, taking an anchorship on some CNN show, all the things that we see them do now. It's so distasteful. It cheapens the office. And it really disenfranchises many people because, I mean, obviously, if your idea is to get rich, you go into politics,
Yeah.
and
Which
you
what an
become,
abomination.
yeah, hand over fist, you're making money mysteriously. Nancy Pelosi, I'm
Yeah.
looking at you. Your
Yeah,
husband
I don't
just
think they should be
happens to
allowed to
be
dabble in
so
the
fortunate.
stock market. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
no stock market for them, no retirement. I mean, just we really need to take away a lot of the perks they've built up, and honestly, we need to actually prosecute them when they step over the line. I really think that prosecutions are key, and I think that if we did see a police force that was more interested in holding the politicians to account, that would raise their standing in society. It would make them much more loyal to the people, which is where that loyalty should belong, and I think we would be in a better situation with that as well.
Absolutely.
So, my next principle, biology is reality. We need to put an end to the Frankenstein doctors, because I keep hearing, because it's not just about the trans issue, although what's going on there and the detransition stories I'm hearing, I mean, I cannot listen to it without getting super emotional, and the doctors don't care. They know that if they go through that process, they will have a client for life. They are milking these people for all the money they are worth, and any money they can beg, borrow, or steal, it is wrong. It violates the Hippocratic Oath. There needs to be a complete recentering on patient care. And part of that, we need to crack down on the peddling of the pharmaceutical companies, especially as they are creating drugs that just manage conditions and perpetuate them instead of actually researching cures, which is what their proper business should be. I think we should start encouraging natural medicines, natural forms of medicine wherever possible and practical. I would like to see a general knowledge of that actually taught in schools. Teach people how to do these things. They'll be better off. And we have to stop pushing pills. It's just the answer to every problem. And we need to outlaw pharma advertising. I didn't realize this, but the United States is one of the few countries in the world where pharmaceutical companies are allowed to advertise. And I thought, maybe we wouldn't have people going to their doctors over every little thing saying, I've heard about this drug or that drug, and getting hooked on all of this expensive stuff for life if it wasn't constantly pushed in their face. So,
Correct. Yes, it's a
thoughts on
hypochondriac
that?
dream. I love the hypochondriacs that we all know are like, I think I have this condition. Well, they would have not known in any other circumstance had it not been advertised or suggested to them. They're not fed statistics on how many people are afflicted, and you could be one of the millions. Yes, I agree. Advertising has always been off putting to me as far as medicine goes. That should be left to the doctors. Plus, it also makes the doctors lazy when the
Yeah,
advertising is done for them, and they therefore do not have to, be up on the science. They no longer read the journals. It's very rare to find a doctor who understands cutting edge technology. I know that with my medical condition, I'll disclose I have type 1 diabetes. I read and I stay up to date on the newest technologies and available treatments and things like that. I'll take it to my doctor and they're like, I've never heard of that. Well, it
Oh,
was published 3 years ago. The clinical trial is over. It's coming to market. Do you think that's something that we could explore? Well, I don't know. Do you want it? That's not a question you want to hear from your medical physician.
no.
What do you think,
Yeah,
layman?
I mean we're getting we're supposed to be paying them for their expertise, and it seems that they don't have a whole lot of expertise to offer anymore, and and then they complain about I don't know why people don't just take our advice and do what we say they should do, and I'm like, well, golly gee, could it be that enough people have had personal experiences with a doctor that gave them cause for doubt of, ah, maybe the person who should be in charge of my health is me after all? Just a
Right.
thought.
I mean, in my personal situation, for sure, I utilize an insulin pump, which is not a new technology by any means. I mean, it's been around since the 80s, I think, were the first rudimentary pumps. But regardless, so I've had diabetes quite a while. I'm on a pump. When I go to the hospital, whether to be outpatient or inpatient, they always take the pump and then put me back on a sliding scale. And for anybody with diabetes will know that is an archaic way to administer insulin. It is a way to just barely keep you alive. It is
Oh,
such that harkens back to like World War II, the sliding scale, but that is still common practice in
jeez.
hospitals. And I will eventually, when I go, if I know I'm going in for a procedure, like when I had my children, I negotiated with the doctors beforehand that I would keep my pump, that they will not take it away. I will not go to a sliding scale. I will administer my own insulin, and because I have to take that advocacy for myself, they usually relent. And they're like, yeah, do whatever you want. So it's again, it's one of those things where the medical field has been given over to the civilian, and without trying to be proactive in your own manner, if you're not proactive for your family or for yourself, then you're at their mercy and they're lazy
Mhm.
and incompetent. So yes, I agree that we need to do some major renovation on what healthcare means.
Yeah, that is for sure. My next idea has to do with property and self sufficiency. I think it's important for citizens to own property and for them not to be edged out of the market by all of these corporations. The corporations, they have a very feudalistic type of structure, and the more they own, the more they control, the more they exert a very feudal like control over us. And I think as Americans, we need to. We need to put an end to that. But whenever we own property, that helps us put down roots in the community, and then we are much more committed to actually build the community, sustain that community, and have a legacy to leave behind. I think this culture of moving around hither willy nilly, treating homes like they're investment properties and moving every few years, I I don't think that's been a particularly good way for people to live. I think we really need to rethink that and actually start thinking about building homes. Um, and I
Mm,
think citizens should be working to become as self-sufficient as possible, both as individuals, as family units, and likewise, I think the nation's top priority should be as self-sufficient as possible. We should make as much of what we need in order to exist and sustain ourselves as what is humanly possible. If we could get to a state where essentially we're trading with other nations for wants instead of needs, I think that would make us much stronger. I think the more dependent we are and the more interconnected we are for just basic functioning needs on other nations, the more of a threat it is to our national security. And I mean, Europe is getting a very up close and personal look at it now, but I mean, we're not too far behind them. And I'm
right.
I'm worried, and I would like to reverse this trend. What do you think?
For sure. Yeah. I think it was probably 2012, 2013, maybe a little bit after that, that first started seeing advertisements for companies like, OfferPad, or, those types of home buying. Now, they've been around forever. We've all seen the little sign on the side of the road that's like, we buy ugly houses and stuff like. There's always been the investment property, but this
Yeah.
large scale. we'll buy your house and you don't have to do anything. That set off some red flags in me from the very beginning, because like, wait, if they go in and they buy up the whole neighborhood, they've totally decimated competition. It's like mob boss type of thing where the company store owns everything
Yeah.
and you're beholden. It doesn't mean all the home prices will be set, all the standards will be the same, and then what? How do we get
Yeah.
them back? How do we get those properties back to us privately? So yeah, I agree that the idea of a home or housing being an investment for profit, I think, is egregious. Yes, I think that your home should have value, but it should have that more familial legacy type of value than it does. You built on the beach, therefore your property's now worth, such and such a dollars. Um, and then that opens it up to the foreign market. You're right. What happens when the foreign entities come in and buy up, and then we have, I mean, it's like a tsunami of invasion at that
Yeah. I
point.
mean,
It's a slow
they have
rolling.
functional control. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's always, we always think about, like, in historical invasions, it's a charge of the front line and the two sides clash, but a much more a cavalier, or it's not even it's like a sneakier way, a more clever way, is to infiltrate, establish from within, and then when you call the tune, everybody rise up, and what are you going to do? They're already there. They're already among you. And I think that's dangerous, as far as like China buying land in America. I think that should be a no-go, because again, I don't want our government to start using state and governmental, like federal lands, to pay off our debts. That would
Yeah.
be
Which,
really bad.
I
If
mean,
you woke up one day and Yellowstone is owned by, you know, China, Russia, Venezuela, whoever we need to owe money to, you know, even the UK. I don't want to owe money to the UK. I don't want to owe money to Australia or anybody else.
yeah, I mean, I'm fine with us having a good trade relations and partnerships with the rest of the Anglosphere. We have common history, common heritage, common language. But even then, like you said, doesn't mean I want to be in debt. That
Right.
is not a good situation to be in.
And
Let's see. And
I'm not against having them use the land, but they should rent it. They should not have ownership. That's the drawing line for me. So if like a company in the Netherlands wants to set up shop in New York City, great. Pay us. Pay us for the privilege, and then we'll talk.
and Yeah, and understand you'll be adhering to American standards. You're not going to be imposing how things are done back home. I say
Right.
that louder for the communists in the back. I mean, I mean, it really is very, very serious. And I think we've also got to just break this idea of like, well, no one's not marching an army on us, no one's shooting at us, therefore everything's fine. It's time to be adults and to realize what century we're living in, and these hostile nations, if they can if they can get what they want out of us without having to go through the effort or the expense of physical destruction, then that's a better way for them to go. Read the freaking Art of War. I mean, it'll make much more sense to you then. Which, by the way, we are still doing a book club on. So join us at the last Wednesday of every month. Okay, promo over. But now for the last point that I wanted to bring up, because I know we have been talking for a bit, but everyone stay with us. And I think this is really important. And I think this harkens back to all the principles that you brought up at the beginning of our discussion. And it's building a common American culture, because we don't have a long history. We don't have common ancestry. We don't have shared religion to bring people together. So we have got to have a robust American culture to help knit us together. And Along with that, I think we need to get back in the habit of encouraging marriage, encouraging people having families, being involved parents with child rearing, having respect for the elderly, and encouraging those bonds to last multi-generational. Uh, this is where most people find the greatest satisfaction in life. And if you have strong families, you tend to have much stronger countries. We need to promote well rounded education. I mean, our education system is a mess, so much so I couldn't even get into it with this, but a well rounded education aimed towards creating well rounded human beings. And I think, honestly, that needs to be done a lot more in the home and a lot less institutionalized. Um, I think we need to encourage true proficiency and emphasis on practical skills, as well as having a good philosophical base of having people understand the nature of ideas and what they mean when they are applied. I think we need to promote common traditions. I mean, we're entering into, Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Yule. These are common to us culturally as Americans, even for people for whom this isn't necessarily spiritual occasions. It's still a common cultural celebration. We need to encourage that because it means we have something that we can all share. And I think we need to start rewarding good stewardship and rewarding innovation. So people who are, keeping their immediate communities and environments tidy, people who go to the efforts of beautification, people who are promoting better methods of trash disposal, of, to where we are having better kept environments. Not only does that make it more pleasant to live in, but it does something. It says I'm invested, I'm taking care of this. And I think these would all be very good virtues to have in an actual functioning republic.
Yes, I agree. I agree. There's far less community outreach than we're being told that there is. And I encourage. COVID really put a hamper on some of that. Some of the things that we took for granted, like gathering together for the holidays and things like that. And maybe I'll go, maybe I won't. I think some of us are more determined now than ever to make those
Yeah.
dates and to keep those holidays prominent. My husband and I were talking yesterday about the prospect of not having any trick-or-treaters. And we're still going to decorate. We're still going to put the invitation out there. We're going to perpetuate the culture. And we want to do that even if we get zero trick-or-treaters. That's less of a point than it is that, hey, look, this cultural icon still lives in this house, and it can be in this neighborhood. I know in our last neighborhood, when we first moved in, we weren't sure of the feel of the neighborhood, so we kind of minimalistically decorated, just kind of put some things out in the yard. But then everyone commented, "Oh man, you did really old school. Love it. This is what I grew up with. Nobody nobody has their house open for trick or treating. I wish y'all do this all the time." So the next year we went over the top. We did everything we wanted to do, and we were super well received within the community. Now, again, this was in 2020. So October of 2020, when the left was still screaming that we needed to be shuttered inside, we had the most fantastic Halloween night, had hundreds of trick-or-treaters come through
Oh,
because the word got out. So the neighborhood trickled through, and then they told their friends and they told their friends. And so over the course of the night, we had quite a number of people come by to just drive by, see what we had set up, stop in, get some candy, talk for a minute. And it's that kind of culture that the holiday, for at least us, is really about. It is about the cultural aspect of the veil being thin. The what is life and death, and how do we deal with these things. And it's good to talk about it. So many Christians just poo poo the idea that we should celebrate holidays that aren't religious in their at their heart, or at least they're not Christian at their heart. But I think that that's the wrong attitude. I think that we as Americans should pay observance to things like Columbus Day, things like Flag Day, things like Veterans Day. These secular, man-made honoring holidays that do bring the culture together, and you can do cultural things during those celebrations that everybody can rally around. And not that Halloween is one of those type. That is a, a religious observation for most, but for some it is just fun and games, and that's okay
Yeah,
too. I
it
think that
is.
if they're willing to participate, then again, you're perpetuating a culture of unity.
Well, that and also, just to not to get too sidetracked, but with the Halloween, it's a way that, we kind of skirt around the edges of things that are scary. And instead of being, shaking in our boots, we can make them playful, we can make them fun, we can take away some of the psychological paralysis surrounding fear. And honestly, I think that is something we could really use. I mean, look how paralyzed people were with fear people were during COVID. I mean, and some of them, are still in this really disturbed mental condition. Even now, I heard about how it was, I think, the radio personality Howard Stern, how he's just now leaving his little COVID bubble. And just
Yeah,
how alarmed he is. And he just, I don't want to get COVID. I don't want to die. And I'm thinking, my goodness. I mean, we have enough of a mental health issue. I mean, so I think, with Halloween, that helps you, deal with fear. Thanksgiving comes around. I mean, that's celebrating productive work. It's celebrating friendships that, perhaps you didn't think you were possible. It's about coming together. And it's about being nice to, great Aunt Petunia, even if she did say something that wasn't so nice to you last year. And with Christmas, I mean, what a better holiday for hope, whether you call it Christmas, Yule, or, the solstice, or, whatever it is. I mean, all of those holidays have to do with hope, a returning of the light. I mean, we need these things. We need them culturally as much as, many of us need them spiritually.
yes, yes, absolutely. I mean, again, and that goes back to that whole goodwill toward men.
Yeah.
If we can celebrate holidays culturally together, whether or not we participate in the religious aspects of them, that's kind of that's a secondary type of thing. But if you can wish somebody a Merry Christmas as a pagan
Hmm.
and be at peace with yourself, you don't feel like you're betraying your kind, so to speak, and then I can do the same, and I can celebrate Halloween in likewise what you said, in a playful manner, being respectful, but still also, adhering still to my own principles. I would not consider that to be a religious holiday for myself, so I don't participate in any of the religious observations, but I do participate in the cultural observations, the idea of dressing up, the idea of decorating your house or warding off spirits, the idea of being generous, handing out candy, and getting together with the neighbors and having a party, or playing with the spooky, that kind of thing, exploring the ideas of fear and death and scary and darkness, and those are good things that we as humans can bond over, because they're all part of the human experience. What doesn't matter what you believe religiously, we're all scared of something. And so when we have an observance where we can get together and talk about those things, then we can develop a culture to combat the fear, to combat, again, a solutions based kind of,
Solutions. We're
so if you're
practical
scared,
around here.
right, you're scared of spiders or you're scared of clowns, then those are the things that we perpetuate at that holiday, to then, in a controlled, relaxed manner, can laugh at ourselves. We need the levity. We
Yeah.
need the cheerfulness that goes into that. And so that, I think, culturally speaking, that's what a culture is, how you get along, how you cope with your life in your generation, the circumstances to which you were born, and what problems that arise during your time. And it, that's why cultures change, and it's why we need to look to the past to see what worked for them and what didn't, and stop trying to perpetuate what didn't, socialist,
Yes.
communist.
Yes.
It's not a good
Please.
culture. That's not good
No, it made
culture.
everyone miserable.
And we need
Miserable
to
people in really
definitely,
ugly buildings.
yes, we definitely need to detach culture from race. There's no such thing as a white culture or a black culture or, a yellow culture. I don't know. That's not even been brought up, but it will be. It's really funny because they always then move to the ethnicity. So there's white, black, and then there's Asian and Indian and Mexican or Latino or whatever, wherever they
It's
want
funny
to
they
call
never but they never talk about English or Irish or French or German or Italian or Russian or any of this
it.
other
No,
stuff. No, we're
yeah,
just one
just
great
like,
big blob. I think you're right.
yeah.
Because unlike these other countries where essentially you have a tribe that grew in numbers and formed a nation, America is very much a patchwork quilt. So if in order to avoid really nasty violence, we are going to have to say, Americanism is our culture. We brought these
Mhm.
things together, and we have some cool stuff, and this is what we can all share, and this is something that has to be accessible to all of us. Otherwise we're going through a pretty nasty dark road. But I think we can prevent it, and I think it's the first thing that you really brought up. Amanda, you disappeared. Can you still hear me? Amanda? Uh-oh. I'm not sure where she went, so I think I better wrap ourselves up here. But I think everything that Amanda and I have talked. Oh, there you are. Good. I was going
Sorry
to
about
say
that.
that. No, it's all right. It happens. But I just to kind of wrap us up, I think everything comes back to that first concept you talked about, the concept of love. Because if we have love for ourselves, we are wanting to be free and we're wanting to also have belonging. If we have love for our nation, we want it to be in a functional state. We want to be at peace with our neighbors, all of these other things. And if we have love, then we're definitely not going to be encouraging governmental policies that just make human life impossible. So,
Correct.
love, as always, wins the day.
Yeah. So
Oh,
this
so
is a,
those are good.
it's a
Go
good.
on.
I was going to
No,
say
no,
this is
those.
a final note. There is a cost, and I thought about this. There's a cost to having these particular attributes, and I'll just quickly count the cost for us. So, in order to have the love, peace, patience, joy, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self control, we must forfeit hate, war, instant gratification, anguish, meanness, evil, recklessness, deceit, and anarchy. I think we can agree that that's probably a good trade. That's my final.
I agree. That's something Christians can get behind. That's something pagans can get behind. I think you and I have really outlined a very workable common ground. So, everyone who's been watching us, thank you. And please, by all means, spread this episode around. If what we have been saying makes sense to you, please spread it around. If if even if you don't start a conversation with us in the comments, which I do hope you do, I hope you come see us on Gilded to further the conversation there. But at least discuss this with other people spread it on social media, and let's see if we can start getting some traction. It shouldn't just be, the Dr. Jordan Petersons of the world, or, the Glenn Becks of the world, or these prominent figures. They shouldn't be the only ones who are having this conversation about what do we want the world to look like and what is required to get there. It should be all of us.
Yeah.
So that's what I got. Any final thoughts, ma'am?
Yes, I would like to, just mention that again, I didn't disagree with anything in particular that Jordan Peterson put forth. I do think that he is more of a provocateur. He's wanting to invoke that deep thought and conversation. So I do again hope the viewers will put forth what they think of what we said, of what
Yes.
Peterson said, and
Yes.
how we can incorporate the policies that you're for, that he's trying to perpetuate, and then the psychology, the foundational understanding behind those things to achieve these goals. Because again, I believe it all to be a net good, as he put it, is the net good going forward, even if it's just a small incremental step generationally. We must start on that right path now.
Oh, 100%. All righty. That does it. Thank you, everyone. Come and see us next time. Goodness knows what we'll talk about. I'm sure we'll come up with something. But bye.
Bye.